Hi, welcome to class. And this week we are moving on to a section on aging in the book. And so this is something that most college students don't actively think about, but as you go through your life course, this is one thing, as you can expect to deal with at some point. And so, we all get older, or we have relatives who are older, and we have to deal with some of the issues that come with aging. This is an issue that like I said, a lot of young people don't think about, when they're in college, but it is something that we do cover here because as we went through the section on stratification, this is one area in society where people are stratified. This week will be a pretty light week. There is no extra reading, and there are no extra videos to watch this week. So I do give you a break in that. And the reason why is because we're starting to compound the ideas of this class. And so I want you to think and take some time. So there is the idea of active thinking. I want you to try to apply this information to yourself. So that's what you're doing with the first four chapter assignment. Then you have chapters 5 through 8, where you're applying the textbook to your own personal biography. And this is important for a few reasons. One is I think it's important when you take a class that can be applied to yourself to see how this matters to you. So why does sociology matter to me as a student? That makes the class a lot more meaningful. Also, I have a paper due on this, and so I want you to use this to reflect back on yourself. So if you do these assignments, the paper should be no problem to put together. If you don't do it, or you don't do a very good job at it, and you don't spend the time thinking, this won't be a very easy paper because you're going to forget a lot of stuff from the earlier chapters of the book, and have a not such a strong biography that you write. So this week we're going to be responding to the Chapter 8 discussion threads. And again, I want you to, when you're doing these threads, this is very hard for people to think of. This is not really an opinion class. This is a sociology class. So it's based on observations, it's based on data. So when people say that a group is held back, they are held back because there's data to support that. This isn't feelings, so it's not that people feel that one group of people is stratified and other people feel they're not. There's data to back up the information that's discussed. So there's quantitative and qualitative analysis that's done to indeed show that people are stratified. And so one group of people that has went through stratification is women. And so although they make up over half of the population of the country, they're still held back, and they're still a minority status for being a woman. And so I want you to discuss that factually. Again, it's not about how you feel, and it's very easy to make that mistake when you come into this class, because some people might not feel that things aren't that bad, because maybe for them what they observe is things aren't that bad for them, or in their family or their neighborhood. But if you look at things as a whole, there are issues, and this goes across other lines. So, when I teach race and ethnic relations, there's people who don't understand that discrimination holds people back. Even small acts of discrimination pile up and make someone's day terrible, and make somebody feel that they live in a pretty racist society. And while other people might not notice that, it's still factually happening. So make sure as you do this class that you use a sociological lens. It doesn't matter how you feel about it. It just matters what's being discussed. And, there is never going to be a class that you take that's going to, well, maybe, but generally in school, you're not going to have questions that are saying, how do you feel? When I ask for a main takeaway, I want to know what you take away from something. If you read something and you don't agree with it, that doesn't matter. There's still something you took away from it. So there's a piece of information that you can take and you can say, well, this was discussed and I didn't know that before. That's interesting. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to open your eyes to things. This also makes you a better reader and better person at analyzing things. I didn't, get into this earlier in the class, but it is something that's important, and it will make, again, your final paper a lot easier to write if you accept these ideas. And you can even use yourself as a data point. So some people, for example, might be discussing, again, I'll use race and ethnic relations, might be discussing race, and they might say, well, despite the fact that people in my ethnicity have a tendency to have XYZ happen, I haven't experienced that. That's a legitimate discussion. And we'll get into that later on, because I'm going to have you watch a video of Patricia Hills Collins delivering an address, addressing a university, and she's discussing her biography, and she's discussing areas that she excelled in, but she also discusses the fact that she had to go through a lot of different things that maybe someone wouldn't have realized if they weren't studying sociology. So she gets into that. Again, this is just for your benefit. I want you to grow with this class. I want, when you're done with this class, to look back and say, wow, that was interesting. I learned this, and I can apply it to myself. That's my goal, is to have you take what we're covering here and apply it to yourself. And I do come from the minority opinion that education is fun, and that learning new things is a fun thing. So that's my stance on that, and I want you to have enjoyable discussions that are fun, because this is a social process, and although you guys don't get to see each other, you do get to interact. And who knows, you'll probably have other classes together, maybe meet face-to-face in a face-to-face class. Anyway, so I'll move on here. So we have the chapter 5 to 8 Dropbox discussion. Again, use a sociological lens, skim through those chapters and see what applies to you. This is done for your benefit, to make this paper much easier to write. Then we have an oppression and privilege paper. You're going to look at areas that you may be oppressed by society. So again, it's not where you feel you're being oppressed, it's where there is oppression. Be factual about it. I usually have one person come out and try to say something that, I'm oppressed because I'm a white person. That doesn't add up to data. Perhaps you could argue that if you grew up and you live in a neighborhood where you're, if you're maybe the only white person in your neighborhood, or if you, if you experience something like that, then you can discuss, okay, well, although I'm part of, the majority of the country, in my own local neighborhood, I have this, and I'm discussing this because I actually grew up in a neighborhood. I grew up in Honolulu, where in my neighborhood, I wasn't part of the minority. I did not feel any oppression from that. I actually enjoyed being in a multicultural environment, but it's something that I want you to really dig into. So try to think of where there is oppression, and you can look at socioeconomic. You can look at the fact maybe that you're rural, and maybe that there's some resources that do not get to you out in your location. I read some articles about people who have to take very long bus trips from their house to school. I have friends who had to actually board in different towns from where they live, because they lived rurally, and the school they went to was in a town far away from their house. And so that's an area of oppression. And so you can discuss that. But you can also flip that and actually look at some privilege attached to that. But again, this is looking at yourself and trying to have fun with this. You're going to post 2 initial posts to the Chapter 9 discussion board. This board is relating back to this chapter, please, when you're doing these, actually show that you read the information, you understand it. Don't just say, this is interesting. Going forward, I'm going to actually start really deducting grades for that in an initial post. So show something that proves to me that you actually read this, so we can have a good discussion. It doesn't matter if you found it interesting or not. I'm sure in the whole chapter you'll find something interesting, but I might ask you a question that you don't find anything interesting about. You still need to answer it, just like in any other class when you're asked a question. So you get to the question, answer it, and in your initial post you can raise a question if you want. Then there's the quiz. So as we go through, you're going to see what looks like a lot of work really isn't. We have this assignment up, the chapters 5 through 8, discussion forum, and then I'll have the quiz right here. And then I have the oppression and privilege assignment listed right below the quiz, because that's not due for another week. You have 2 weeks to complete this assignment. And again, I want you to reflect on this. When I give you 2 weeks, it's not so you can wait until the morning of the next Sunday to start working on it. I would prefer that you actually think about this, get it done, maybe walk away from it and think about it a little bit more. So there's 2 sections. So we're going to have a question that gets flipped. So there's 2 separate sections. Make sure you do both of them. The first one is looking at oppression. So make sure you completely answer these 5 questions. And then I want you to analyze how you were privileged. Have power. If you're having a hard time with this, try to think globally. We live in America. We have some privilege when it comes to the fact that we live in a huge economy that has a ton of power that affects other people. So you can look at the more micro level for your oppression, and if you want and you're stuck and you want to take a big picture, step out to the macro world and look at the international view and of sociology. A lot of sociology classes don't get into international sociology. I like to do that because some people really do have a hard time seeing where they sit on stratification, and I think that makes things a lot easier for them when they're able to say, okay, look, I can apply this to a bigger society. So again, I want you to have fun. I understand that online classes are a lot different than face-to-face. You don't get to actually see me or meet me. If you want to, I can meet you on campus. Just send me an email. If you need a telephone discussion, if you're stumped on something and you have a really difficult question, send me a phone number and a good time to reach you. And I will call you and we can have a short telephone conference. Or if you have a simple question, go ahead and send me an email on D2L again, and I will get back to you. Although when I'm an online teacher, I'm still a teacher. I'm still here to answer questions you have and be a real resource. And I do got to say, I did have some students bring up past issues on quizzes. Some of them were real issues. I did have some questions that, when I copy these questions over from, I have a test bank that I use, and when I pull the questions over, sometimes I do make mistakes. If I do, I will address that. So let me know, because I did have one caught last week that was right at the beginning of the week. So the first person taking the quiz caught the mistake. I was able to fix it. And if there's a question that you got wrong and you don't understand why, that doesn't really mean there's a mistake with it, but you could ask me about it too. I will double check and see, because sometimes the questions are, doomed to be addressed in other ways. I have had bad test questions in the past. But again, these tests are designed to make sure that you actually read the material and are understanding it. So if you miss 1 or 2 questions, it's not going to really affect you in the long run. You'll still do fine at the class. So I'll let you go. Have a great week, and thank you for your time.